When federal agents start hiding their faces on American streets, something is deeply wrong. Senator Gary Peters wasn't just asking a question, he was sounding an alarm. Because when officers in unmarked vans wearing masks and refusing to identify themselves start detaining people, it's not protection. It's fear disguised as authority. And fear is the oldest tool of control. Peters knew it. The room knew it. And in that Senate hearing, Pam Bondi's carefully rehearsed calm couldn't hide the cracks in her story. He asked the question every American should be asking: who are these people, and why are they hiding their faces? Bondi shifted, deflecting, saying the agents were protecting themselves from being doxxed.
Oh, Senator Peters. Senator Peters is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Bondi, good to have you here. Welcome to the committee. General Bondi, leadership at DHS has claimed that ICE and others who are carrying out immigration enforcement activities in support are covering their faces to protect themselves from being doxxed. And certainly I fully understand those concerns and I appreciate those concerns, and I think they're real concerns. But I'm deeply concerned that the lack of identification during these activities is dangerous both to the public as well as to the officers themselves. The public risk being harmed by individuals pretending to be immigration enforcement, which has already happened. We've seen that happen. And these officers also risk being injured by individuals who think they're basically being kidnapped or attacked by some unknown assailant. So my question for you, Attorney General Bondi, is given the number of DOJ employees currently conducting immigration enforcement activities in support of DHS, how are you going to ensure that the safety of the public and the officers, if they continue to not follow required protocol to identify themselves as law enforcement?
And Senator Peters, that's the first time that issue has come to me about them cover. You're saying that law enforcement officers, when they cover their faces.
Right.
I do know they are being doxxed, as you said. They're being threatened. Their families are being threatened. You know,
I get that, but they have to identify themselves. There is an insignia oftentimes. They have to identify themselves as law enforcement. People think, here's a person coming up to me, not identified, covering themselves. They're kidnapping. They'll probably fight back. That endangers the officer as well. And that's a serious situation. People need to know that they're dealing with a federal law enforcement official.
Senator, I would be happy to look at that issue with you and talk to all of our partner law enforcement agencies. But I can assure you that if they're covering their faces now, it's to protect themselves. But they also want to protect all citizens. And that's something we can work together on to ensure the safety of everyone and their families.
Yeah. And it's protecting themselves, too, if they identify themselves. It's not just the person, because someone's going to fight back if you just think a strange person with their face covered is throwing you into a van. Most people will resist that.
It sounds like you have a specific case, and I would
be
happy to talk to you about that at a later time, because I'm not aware of that happening. But I'd be happy to talk to you about that.
We'd be happy to do it. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Earlier this month, the administration announced it was launching an effort to ramp up immigration apprehensions by shifting more than 5,000 personnel from across federal law enforcement, including approximately 2,000 from within the Justice Department, away from their typical duties to focus on immigration-related cases, including targeting individuals whose status had been terminated by this administration. This effort is on top of previous directives for department officials to focus on immigration enforcement. Many of these officials impacted by these directives, unsurprisingly, say they're being forced to turn their attention away from other national security missions, including counterterrorism and cyber security. There has been public reporting that hundreds of FBI agents have been reassigned to immigration-related duties, and raising real concerns among agents themselves that the shift could hinder investigations into terror threats and espionage by China and Russia. And we have also heard concerns about resources being reoriented at the state and local level. Attorney General Bondi, I know the Justice Department officials have said that this president can walk and chew gum at the same time, and that you continue to hold all criminals accountable regardless of immigration status. But numerous reports on the ground from career government officials and some basic common sense would beg to differ. Given the attacks on Iran over the weekend, this issue has become even more salient, with threats from terrorists inspired by Iran, cyber attacks, often by Iran itself or additional efforts by that regime to go after government leaders. So my question is, how are you ensuring that there are enough resources focused on the full range of national security threats, and there's no shortage of those, when so many of our DOJ resources are being reallocated to immigration enforcement?
I talk to Director Patel or Deputy Director Bongino 7 days a week. I speak to my National Security Division. We meet every single day. Emil Bovey, who's currently with us, is doing an incredible job in the national security space as well, helping us. We are doing everything. We are using our resources on all fronts. And when you say immigration, immigration is going hand in hand with the people who have come into our country through our borders. I think just over 1,500 illegal aliens from Iran are here. Chinese individuals, Russian individuals, people from every country. That goes hand in hand with immigration, identifying them, finding them, and getting them out of our country. Will national security be compromised? Not at all, Senator. It will be increased. It will be enhanced. I can tell you, every day we talk about this multiple times a day, 7 days a week, as to what we can do, working hand in hand with DEA, ATF agents, FBI, Homeland Security, ICE, to make sure that our nation is safe. And FBI, they have a 24/7 center set up now. And actually, we've set some up around the country. And you're welcome to actually come see one if you would like anytime. I would love to have you come in and see what we do. But we have that set up around our country on a national security level to be sure Americans are safe and do everything we can to get terrorists who are in our country out of our country.
Well, certainly, I don't disagree with any of that. That obviously criminal elements that are there need to be taken care of. But you're also looking at cybersecurity, which is different. You're looking at counterterrorism issues that are different. And I don't believe that we were over-resourced in those areas. You may beg to differ. So they were not over-resourced. We were making sure that they had the resources to deal with the other threats. But now those people are being pulled off those jobs for another job. I just want to make sure that we're still doing things necessary to protect us from cyber threats, counterterrorism, and the long list of other threats that we face every day.
Thank you for those questions, and I know your background, and that's why it's so important to all of us. And yes, we are. And cybersecurity, I could go on for 2 hours about cybersecurity and what's happening. Not only that, the online child predators online, but the foreign terrorist threats through cybersecurity that we can talk about in a different setting. I'd be happy to discuss all of that with you and our efforts, not only made within our country, but with our partners worldwide.
Well, I'll look forward to having that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
She said their families were threatened, their safety was at risk. But Peters pushed back because the moment a government official acts without identification, the line between enforcement and abuse disappears. He wasn't talking about optics, he was talking about democracy. Because when citizens can't tell whether the person pulling them into a van is a federal agent or a criminal impersonator, trust dies first. And when trust dies, law and order become a mask for something else entirely, unchecked power. The images Peters referred to weren't fiction. Unmarked vehicles, men in tactical gear with no insignia, citizens grabbed off sidewalks uncertain who was taking them or why. For many it looked like something out of an authoritarian playbook, not the United States of America. And yet Bondi's answer was almost chilling in its simplicity. They're protecting themselves. That may sound reasonable until you remember what those masks represent. They're not just fabric, they're a barrier between accountability and authority. Peters didn't buy it. He reminded her that officers covering their faces put themselves in danger too, because when people can't tell if they're being arrested or abducted, they fight back. And that chaos doesn't just endanger civilians, it endangers the very officers the Justice Department claims to be protecting. His message was clear: legitimacy requires visibility, a badge, a name, a chain of command. Take that away and you've taken away the foundation of public trust. But Bondi's tone didn't shift, calm, measured, detached. She promised to look into it as if this was a minor oversight, not a crisis of accountability. She spoke about safety, about cooperation, about coordination with partner law enforcement agencies. It all sounded official, procedural, and empty. The kind of language used to make people stop asking questions. But Peters wasn't finished. He wasn't just worried about the masks, he was worried about what those masks were hiding. Because this wasn't just about immigration raids or undercover operations, it was about where the Justice Department's priorities had gone. Peters exposed something few outside Washington had noticed, a massive shift of resources inside the federal government. Thousands of agents from across departments, including the FBI, were being pulled from national security missions to work on immigration enforcement, not because of a new law or national emergency, but because it made for good politics. More arrests, more footage, more headlines. But at what cost? He pressed Bondi on the numbers. Over 2,000 Justice Department employees reassigned, hundreds of FBI agents taken off counterterrorism, cyber defense and anti-espionage work, all redirected toward immigration cases. The result? Entire units meant to track threats from Iran, Russia and China were suddenly understaffed. In a world where cyber attacks happen daily, where espionage operations never sleep, Peters warned this shift wasn't just reckless, it was dangerous. You don't keep a country safe by chasing the wrong enemies. He gave an example that hit hard. The same week Iran carried out cyber offensives and made public threats against U.S. targets, DOJ agents were being reassigned to immigration sweeps. That's not strategy. That's misdirection.
He said it outright.
We were never over-resourced in counterterrorism or cybersecurity. Taking people away from those missions weakens us. And he was right. It's like pulling firefighters off a burning building to patrol parking lots because it looks tough on camera. But Bondi didn't flinch. She insisted everything was under control, that national security would be enhanced through these reallocations. Enhanced. Peters raised an eyebrow. She started tying immigration enforcement to terrorism prevention, claiming that removing undocumented immigrants somehow improved America's defense posture. It was the kind of logic that plays well on cable news but collapses under scrutiny. She even cited 1,500 individuals from Iran in the country as justification, blending nationalities and threats into one convenient talking point. That's when the tone shifted. Peters wasn't debating policy anymore.
He said as a
He was exposing a mindset, one that equates foreign with dangerous. He saw through the performance. You're treating national security like a talking point. His tone implied, because this wasn't about facts, it was about fear. Fear keeps people quiet. Fear keeps power unchallenged. And when law enforcement is used as a stage for politics, the results are predictable. Confusion, distrust and a public that no longer knows who to believe. Bondi kept insisting she spoke daily with her top officials, Director Patel, Deputy Director Benino, 7 days a week. To her that sounded like diligence, but to Peters it sounded like control. Real independence doesn't require daily check-ins with political leadership. Law enforcement is supposed to operate by law, not by loyalty. And the more Bondi emphasized constant communication, the more it sounded like she was reassuring one person, not the American people. That's when the mask metaphor became something bigger.
life.
Because what Peters uncovered wasn't just physical concealment, it was systemic. Agencies were covering their own faces, hiding decisions behind secrecy and jargon. Public oversight was replaced with performance, appearances over substance, optics over outcomes. The administration can walk and chew gum, Bondi said, meaning they could enforce immigration laws while protecting the country from foreign threats. But everyone watching could tell, they weren't walking, they were stumbling, blinded by political theater. Think about that image. Masked officers in the streets while cyber attacks go unanswered. Espionage networks expanding while resources are drained. It's a trade-off no serious strategist would make, unless the goal isn't safety, but spectacle. Peters' frustration was visible. He wasn't grandstanding, he was warning. Because every resource pulled from cybersecurity, every analyst taken off counterintelligence creates a hole in America's defenses. And while those holes grow, the government puts on a show of strength, hoping the public doesn't notice the cracks underneath. Bondi's insistence that we're doing everything using all resources rang hollow. The more she spoke, the clearer it became. This wasn't coordination. It was confusion dressed as confidence. When she mentioned centers set up around the country, it sounded like an attempt to prove control, but the truth was simpler. The Justice Department had overextended itself, turning national security into a slogan. The people running the show weren't focusing on threats, they were managing perception, and Peters knew perception is fragile. Once people stop believing that law enforcement operates by the book, every action becomes suspect. Every raid, every arrest, every unexplained disappearance feeds conspiracy instead of confidence. That's how democracies weaken, not in one dramatic moment, but in a series of small compromises that erode trust until it's gone. Peter's closing tone carried that weight. We must protect ourselves from foreign cyber threats, from terrorism, from espionage, he said. But not at the expense of our principles. It was a quiet line, but a powerful one. Because this hearing wasn't really about border enforcement or doxing, it was about what kind of country America is becoming. A nation where government power operates behind masks, or one where accountability still matters. The contrast between Peters and Bondi was symbolic, one demanding transparency, the other defending secrecy in the name of safety. What makes this exchange so important is how ordinary it seemed at first. A routine oversight hearing, a few procedural questions. But underneath it revealed the architecture of control, a system where fear justifies everything. Fear of exposure, fear of threats, fear of dissent, and in that climate, even the basic symbols of justice, names, badges, open identification, start to vanish. That's how democracies drift into darkness, not with an announcement, but with a shrug. The deeper danger, as Peters implied, is normalization. Once people get used to seeing masked agents detaining citizens, it becomes background noise. Once you accept that government power doesn't have to show its face, you stop demanding accountability. And once accountability disappears, the door opens for everything else: surveillance, overreach, political policing. History has shown it time and again: when fear replaces transparency, freedom is the first casualty. Bondi's answers might have sounded calm, even compassionate. She spoke of protecting agents, protecting families, protecting citizens. But underneath that calm was a chilling message, that safety requires silence, and that authority must sometimes operate unseen. Peter's counterpoint was simple but vital: in a free country, power must always identify itself. Otherwise it's not protecting you, it's protecting itself. And that's the heart of it. This wasn't just a political disagreement, it was a philosophical divide over the meaning of safety, law and democracy. Peters stood for the idea that legitimacy comes from openness, from the willingness to be seen and questioned. Bondi represented the opposite, a system that sees visibility as a threat. And when those two visions collide, the question isn't who wins the argument. The question is who defines the future, because once we start accepting secret enforcement as normal, the next step becomes easier: more surveillance, less oversight, fewer rights in the name of more security. It's a slippery slope that history has never failed to punish. The promise of safety always comes with a price tag, and when that price is transparency, it's too high. So when Senator Peters asked why officers were hiding their faces, he wasn't just defending procedure, he was defending principle. The principle that power should always show its face to the people it serves. That's not weakness, that's democracy. And the more officials like Bondi deflect, the more critical voices like Peters become. Because make no mistake, this wasn't about one policy or one department, it was about the slow, subtle erosion of accountability in the name of control. The more secrecy becomes routine, the harder it is to pull it back. The masks stay on longer, the explanations get thinner, and soon the difference between protection and oppression becomes a matter of interpretation. Peters saw that coming, and that's why his warning matters. Because every democracy reaches a crossroads where citizens must decide whether they prefer comfort or clarity. Bondi's version of safety depends on compliance. Peters' version depends on courage, the courage to ask, to question, to demand identification from those in power. So the next time you see footage of masked agents in unmarked vehicles, remember this moment. Remember the senator who asked the question most politicians were too cautious to touch. Remember that democracy dies not in chaos, but in quiet normalization. And remember that fear is the most effective disguise power ever wears. Because if we stop asking who's behind the mask wins. If you believe transparency, accountability and truth still matter, if you think freedom should never hide behind fabric and force, then stay curious, stay critical, and stay informed. Subscribe, like and share this video so more people can see what they're not supposed to see. Because awareness is power, and in times like these, power should always belong to the people.